season's greetings, or indeed happy Christmas if you're feeling vaguely festive. You may not be, but hopefully in about another 20 minutes, you'll be going, do you know what, Christmas? Actually, yeah, quite looking forward to it. The purpose of today is really to give you a whistle-stop tour of the Christmas foods that we all know and love, or at least in my case, know and have a love-hate relationship with. We're going to be talking about feasting. Christmas feasting, well, we've done it for a long time, let's face it. Feasting in the middle of winter predates Christmas. So for those of you that are thinking, yeah, Christmas, really not my thing, it's okay, because you've still got an excuse to light a massive great fire and sit around and eat until you're stuffed. We've been doing it for thousands of years, well beyond the advent of Christianity in the late Roman period. Anytime it's been cold and wet and miserable, and let's face it, in the Northern Hemisphere, that means the entire, pretty much, of the last 6 months of the year, the 6 months that bridge December, anytime it's been cold and wet and miserable, we've had this sort of human inclination to light a big fire and sit around it. And the middle of December, let's face it, is pretty depressing. If you're a farmer, there's not a lot to do. If you're a livestock farmer, you've probably killed most of your cattle and you're just trying to eke them out through winter, just keeping a few breeding pairs going. So what better thing to do than sit around, eat, and I won't beat about the bush, drink. Because Christmas, well, we're all told that it's a season of goodwill to men and loveliness and coziness and Christianity, blah, blah. And for some people, it certainly is. But the biggest theme that you will find when you look at Christmas in the past is that it is an excuse to eat too much and get absolutely bladdered. If you don't drink, that's fine. The modern Christmas doesn't always involve getting absolutely, well, like these people that you can see at the bottom. These are just images that I've plucked through history, but time and time again, you find that Christmas is about having a really good time and forgetting the woes. One of my favourite images here is the one on the bottom right, which is a Victorian Christmas card involving robins getting drunk on punch, while in the background you can see a cat coming up to, well, presumably eat them. Victorian Christmas cards are amazing. So if you want to get yourself truly in the spirit, just have a look for Victorian Christmas cards on the online search engine of your choice, and then think to yourself, gosh, haven't we lost a lot? The thing about Christmas, though, is what it isn't about necessarily is a prescriptive set of foods. Time and time again, we will see images of these things. We will read in the newspapers, we will hear on the radio all about the fact that the Christmas meal is centred on turkey and on roast potatoes and sprouts and on mince pies and Christmas pudding and on Christmas cake. And then maybe we might shade into canapes, trifles, and what to do with leftovers. I'm here to tell you that that's just not true. We have not eaten these foods for time immemorial, but they do have a long history, and that's what I'm going to explore with you. But what I do want you to remember throughout this is that if you don't like turkey, that's fine. If you think that Christmas pudding is in fact something that really should be just thrown out, that's also fine. If you're not keen on mince pies, hey, embrace it, and all the rest. So what I want to do is liberate you really from this overwhelming pressure to eat certain foods, or if we're not eating them, to at least think we might think about eating them, if that makes sense. I will come right out and say it. I hate turkey. I haven't eaten turkey since I left home, and therefore was not forced to eat turkey every single Christmas. And once you embrace the non-turkey Christmas, life is just so much more liberated, frankly. These pictures, which some of you will be glaring at with undisguised horror, are again drawn from cookery books. Back in the day, the 1980s soft-focused turkey is, I think, one of my favourites. But I have to admit a soft spot for the canapes over in the top right, which some of you are thinking, what are they? Well, they're little salami baskets made by putting a piece of salami into a cupcake container, baking it until it sets, and then filling them with baked beans. So if you think that some of the things around this Christmas are the worst that people can come up with, if you honestly believe that pigs in blanket flavoured crisps from a supermarket I shan't name are the worst thing, I mean, they are pretty awful, then you really haven't seen the 1960s Christmas. But don't worry, because you're going to. So let's start with turkey. I mean, you know, tackle the beast by its horns. Turkey is, well, if we actually liked turkey, wouldn't we eat it more than once a year? I mean, I'm just putting it out there. Other countries do eat it more than once a year. It's quite a popular feed in America. And obviously, as most of you will be aware, turkey comes from America, the Central and Mesoamerican zone. We didn't really have turkey until we discovered America and then started to bring back foods from America. And indeed, even then, we in Britain didn't have turkey because it wasn't us that got to America first. It was the Spanish. So with turkey, well, 500 years ago, no turkey. Woohoo! We ate many other things instead. The turkey is a bit of a strange beast in many ways because we don't eat it, do we? And yet, when it came to our shores, it was hailed as the greatest thing since, well, peacock, actually. Turkey's quite good at Christmas because the point about Christmas is you want to put on a feast. You want to put on a show. You want to eat meat as well. Lots and lots of people, when I used to work in costume, would come up to me and say things like, oh, well, back in the past, there is nothing for me because I'm a vegetarian. Well, great. So was most of the population back in the past. Certainly before really the end of the 19th century, very few people could afford to eat meat, which meant that giving it up voluntarily would have been seen as the mark of either someone very religious or a bit nutty. If you therefore wanted to put on a feast, you wanted meat on your table, really to show the fact that you could eat this very expensive food that most people couldn't get hold of. And the more spectacular, the better. So before turkey, we used to eat things like swan, bustard, peacock, all these big birds that look great on the table. And one of the reasons that they look great on the table is because they come covered in feathers, and those feathers are often quite spectacular. So what you can see now is a turkey pie from the 16th century. And this was quite a popular way to display your turkey. So you would take your turkey off the bone, you'd make it into a pie. The pastry case that you can see at the bottom was known as a coffin. But before you started to decarcass your turkey, you'd take off the neck, the wings, and also the tail. And they would be dried out in a slow oven on skewers, which you could then put back into the pie. So they'd be cooked enough not to bleed all over the pastry, but also would hold their shape. And you can see it does look very spectacular. Later on, you could get taxidermy versions of the same thing, and you see this presentation with an awful lot of different birds. You could also stretch the skin out over a wire frame and put it over your pie if you wanted to. Roast meats were always served heads and legs on, so they really were quite spectacular. You can see turkey appear a lot of times on the festive table. And bear in mind I'm saying festive because the modern preoccupation with Christmas Day and Christmas dinner happening only on one day a year really is something that is post-Victorian. So previously, you would have eaten a lot of what we would today call Christmas foods throughout the winter season, throughout the whole of December, throughout the whole of the traditional 12 days of Christmas, so from December through to Epiphany, and indeed throughout a lot of January as well, because what we call Christmas foods back in the past were just seasonal foods. So we ate them throughout the season. That's an extract from a menu from the early 19th century, and you can see the first course includes a soup removed with a fish, so you take the soup away and bring in the fish, and then a turkey roasted. But as you can start to see, that's only one among many different dishes up on the table. And turkey, well, it was liked. I mean, it was tastier than peacock, it was less greasy than swan, it was easier to get hold of than bustards, it looked spectacular, you could farm it. And indeed, we were farming turkeys by the 1540s. So it was quite a good, convenient choice. And it was accessible to people. The tastes were accessible. Not all people, though, very much the rich. It was a big bird. You needed enough people in your family or wider household to eat it. And because you used to serve a lot of dishes on the table at once, that meant really an awful lot of people needed to come over for Christmas. But turkey was popular. I cannot deny the popularity of turkey at Christmas. This is a Victorian butcher's shop, and you can see all of those carcasses hanging up. Turkeys were farmed in Norfolk, and they were driven down to London by their thousands with their feet absolutely slaying the roads before the invention of tarmac. Then they'd be slaughtered and hung up outside the butcher. But you can see there that it's not just turkeys hanging up. There's a lot of game and there are a lot of geese, which were smaller, more manageable and much more suited for the middle class or lower class household. This is a menu from the 1930s, or two menus from the 1930s, and you can see on there tomato soup, roast sirloin of beef, Yorkshire pudding, roast potatoes, buttered green peas, and then on the bottom, onion soup, roast stuffed chicken, bread sauce, roast potatoes and buttered spinach. Turkey was not the majority choice. You had to be rich, you had to have a lot of people, you had to have an oven big enough to put it in. For the vast majority of people, if they chose poultry at Christmas, it was a chicken or it was a goose. So choose one of those, chuck out the turkey, and you're perfectly in the spirit of pretty much everyone until the 1960s, when our ovens got bigger and we saw all those glistening turkeys of the American Thanksgiving on our television screens, and decided just to transfer that to Christmas. So instead of turkey, I would like to make a plea for beef. You saw it in one of those menus. If we had to choose one meat which was really the exemplar of Christmas in Britain, it would be beef. Beef, beef, beef. And it would be beef like this. You can see the massive sirloin that you can see there. Everybody smiling and tucking in. It's a reason that we're called the roast beef by the French. It's the reason French used to send their chefs to Britain to learn how to roast. This great beast would have been roasted in front of a fire on a spit and served up like that. Queen Victoria had a baron of beef on her Christmas sideboard on Christmas Day with the date on it in flowers every single year of her reign. Beef was the symbol of Britishness, the symbol of festivities, the symbol of feasting, the symbol of coronations and birthdays and everything else besides. Beef it is. And if you want to be truly of the past and really be inspired by the 18th century and a little bit beyond, then you want to serve it with the thing that is on the other end of the table, which looks like a large cannonball. That is plum pudding. Now today, we call plum pudding Christmas pudding. It's the same thing. Plum puddings in the past were slightly less sweet because sugar was more expensive, and they often were slightly drier. They certainly didn't need to be made months in advance. And the whole modern fuss about stir up Sunday or making your pudding and hanging it up, chuck it out, really, honestly. Make it on the day you're going to eat it. It's absolutely fine. Or don't. That's up to you, because they will keep if you want them to. Before plum pudding, there was a thing called plum pottage, and plum pottage is a sort of cousin, I suppose, to plum pudding. You can see it there. Plum pottage has all the flavours of plum pudding. So it's beef, or rather beef stock in most cases, lots of dried fruit, lots of spice. It's a beautiful, unctuous thing. Often there's bone marrow in the sauce to make it really velvety. To modern tastes, it's just too much. It's too rich. You can't quite cope with it. But to the tastes in the past, where dried fruit, sugar, spices, all those things were very, very expensive, it would have been the taste of absolute luxury. And pottage was a catch-all term for anything that was a stew. So you'd have had pottage on every table, whether you were rich or poor. But if you were poor, your pottage would be onions and leeks. And if you were rich, it would be this stuff. Very gradually, this stuff sort of evolved into a much more solid mass. The two coexisted for a very long time, so it's not straightforward to say plum pottage became plum pudding, but eventually some bright spark came up with the idea of putting this into a pudding cloth, adding suet and boiling it, and you got that. The traditional shape of a plum pudding, a cannonball shape, because it's been boiled in a cloth with no pudding basin. Pudding basins came along a little bit later. There was another sort of evolutionary dead end as well, and that was a thing called hacking, which was very, very popular in the north. And hacking is, how to describe it? Well, it's kind of like a doughier version of Christmas pudding. It's really nice, I think, but it is perhaps not to everybody's tastes. But if you want to try it, have a look again on the internet and you'll easily be able to find a recipe. It's often meatier as well. Plum pudding for a long time was eaten just as plum pudding, with the beef on the table at the same time, very much part of a savoury course. And if you think about it, it's a lot like eating a chutney, and it makes perfect sense to eat it with the beef because it is quite hefty. And actually having a slice of it with your beef means that you don't have that kind of, oh, I'm really full, oh my God, there's a plum pudding coming feeling that we all get today. Today, in fact, plum pudding, Christmas pudding, is in decline because people say they cannot cope with something that hefty at the end of a large meal. The average Christmas dinner today is 5,000 calories, which is quite a lot unless you're about to go off and run a marathon. So you can see why there are Christmas pudding haters. I am not one of them. I just think eat it with the beef or put it in a sandwich or fry it with bacon on Boxing Day. Oh, yes. Plum pudding was, however, rapidly associated with Christmas once Christmas started to really come up as a thing. So if we move into the Victorian period, that same period that turkeys are really, really taking off, but not the majority meat, Christmas starts to be the thing, the real thing that everyone's talking about. And a lot of these foods that were once seasonal start to become gathered together on this one day, on Christmas Day. And plum pudding is one of them. It's first known as Christmas pudding in the 1830s, and by the end of the 19th century, in most cookery books, it's now Christmas pudding, not plum pudding, eaten very much on Christmas Day, and of course set on fire as well. The real craze for Christmas pudding comes in the 1930s, when there's a thing called the Empire pudding, which was invented by the government and the royal chef using ingredients from around the globe, wherever the Britons had colonised and conquered. And it forms the basis of the modern day royal Christmas pudding, although they don't call it the Empire Christmas pudding anymore for obvious reasons. It is quite fun to set it on fire though, let's face it. Then, okay, mince pies. Those of you that like Christmas pudding almost certainly like mince pies because they are similarly flavoured. Lots of rich spices. And of course, in the original version, meat. Because that's the point. They were mince meat pies. And just as plum pottage was about meat, spice, sugar, all the good expensive things in life, so too were mince pies. Very similar roots, very expensive, really good way to show off. They started off as very big pies. You can see top left there, a huge one about a foot across with a crest on top. And it would have been served like that. So taking the lid off, moving it to one side and concentrating on the interior. And Tudor and early Stuart mince pies were about a third meat. So really quite hefty and quite a shock to modern tastes. As you then move into the 17th century and the 18th century, for a brief while, they're shaped, very beautiful, hand done, absolutely gorgeous. By the Victorian period, there were a lot of puff pastry mince pies. And of course, there's the modern day travesty that you can buy with that sort of flaccid white pastry where you're not quite certain what the fat involved is, but you're pretty certain it's not butter. The amount of meat as well in mince pies dwindled throughout history. So if you look at the Tudor one, it's a third meat. By the time you get to the Stuarts, it's probably about under that, sort of quarter, keeps going down, 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 down. One of my favourite recipes, there's about a pound of meat in 2.5 stone of mincemeat in old money. Sorry, it's Victorian. And the meat then just adds a kind of back note, a complexity, which is very much lacking from modern mincemeat. And that's a pretty typical example of a 17th century minced pie. So it starts off with meat tongue, which is veal tongue. A lot of them use tongue, some use feet for poorer types of mincemeat. The royal ones use fillet steak, which seems a little bit over the top. And I would say to you, if you're in doubt and you're going, oh, well, I'm not sure, try a Victorian mincemeat because they really are superb. The level of flavour and the level of depth of flavour that you get from them far outweighs that kind of insipid, rather sweet, icky stuff that you get today. Of course, if you make your own mincemeat, yours won't be like that anyway. There are also variants on that. So you can see there, that's 2 recipes from Charles Francatelli, who was Queen Victoria's cook until he got sacked. And he's done you a lemon mincemeat, which is absolutely fantastic because you boil whole lemons and then mash them up. So it's like a punch. And I mean, they're so refreshing to eat. They're beautiful. And at the bottom there, you can see his mincemeat à la royale. And if you're thinking, yeah, but mince pies, mincemeat, whatever, I'm not that fond. I always end up with half a jar left over. Quite frankly, it's enough. Well, Fanny Craddock has the answer. She does a mincemeat omelette, which involves an omelette and mincemeat, and then setting it on fire with brandy. So I'd strongly suggest having a crack at that. The cake, honestly, all of these flavours are really typical, aren't they? Deep, dark, spicy flavours. I love a bit of Christmas cake. I like to keep mine going till about August and I eat it with cheese because that is the way cake was meant to be eaten. Cakes, again, one of those things that goes back to at least the medieval period. When they were medieval cakes, they would have been essentially like a big, rich, fortified bread. And then they develop through history. The yeast goes down, the rising agents go in. Not that it does any good if you've made your cake big, fat and rich enough. And these great cakes, as they were known, or plum cakes, increasingly become associated really with festivals, with big events, with feasting, because they cost a lot to make. By the late Victorian period, this all-important everything's about Christmas period, you start to get adverts like this one, Huntley and Palmer's Christmas cakes, and they are amazing, all sorts of different decoration. Nobody fed their cakes. Let's just get that one out in the open. If you've made a cake and you're feeding it and that's part of your Christmas ritual, it's lovely and I salute you. But it is Delia's fault. That's as much as I'm prepared to say on that. Cakes came in all different shapes and sizes. Weird, wonderful, wacky, fantastical. I really do think that if all you're doing is putting a bit of fondant icing on a sort of insipid light fruit cake and tying some ribbon around it, you're not making an effort. You might as well stop. Just eat cheese instead and have done. But there is an alternative as well. Some people I know don't like Christmas cake, or they don't make one, or they feel there's a kind of pointlessness to it because there's so much else that's fruity and rich and delightful. So why on earth should they be forced to have yet another big, rich, fruity thing? Especially when do you eat it? I mean, I do admit that that aspect is difficult. You could eat it on Christmas Day, but you've already eaten 5,000 calories and you're stuffed. You could eat it on Boxing Day, but you've just fried up your Christmas pudding and your bacon and you're quite stuffed. Or you could wait till friends come over, but which ones do you like enough to actually broach it? And if then you've got other people around and you've already broached it, it's a minefield. I would suggest instead that we should go back to the sort of early part of the 19th century and before, when one of the iterations of this great cake, this plum cake, was a thing called 12th cake. And this really, I suppose, predated Christmas cake in that 12th cake and Christmas cake, there's not a lot of overlap. 12th cake was brilliant. If those of you who are familiar with France or Spain or any of the other nations where there is a thing for Epiphany, in France it's Galette des Rois, I think in Spain it's Gâteau des Reis, there's all sorts of different cakey things that you would eat traditionally on the Epiphany on 12th night. And the idea, certainly in those countries and here, was that you concealed a token within your cake. So here it would be a bean and a pea, hence the saying the bean king and the pea queen, because whoever found those tokens would be king and queen for the day. Today, often in France, it's a little sort of ceramic token, which is a terrible choke hazard, and you can break your teeth on them. So it's, I kind of think that's a level of jeopardy that's quite fun. So up to you. But anyway, you would have your 12th cake, you would find your bean and your pea, or later on you would play games. So what you can see in the middle there, Park's new 12th night characters, those are packs of cards that you could buy, and you would have your cake and you would deal out the cards and you play a card game, and it was all brilliant fun. But the point was, it meant you ate your fruitcake at the end of Christmas. It meant you sent Christmas off with a bang. I always think today we kind of peak on Christmas Day. We've started now. We started back in like October, let's face it. And somehow we kind of go, yeah, Christmas, brilliant. Yeah. Oh, it's Christmas Day. Oh, I've eaten and I've drunk. Okay, it's over now. Fine. And then all the Christmas decorations are taken down well before 12th night. And by the 6th of January, we're all back at work moaning about our diets. And all the newspapers are telling us that we've eaten too much, despite the fact that they were the ones that published the recipes in the first place. It's not nice. Far better, I think, to not have your Christmas cake as Christmas cake, but rename it 12th cake. And on the 6th of January, get together with your mates, get drunk if that's your thing, play silly games, eat your cake, and send the whole thing off with a bang and a really, really lovely feeling until next year. So maybe if you're only taking one thing away from this presentation, you can think about 12th cake, or at least just having a slice of your Christmas cake on 12th night so that you feel good rather than bad about what you've just experienced. This brings me nearly to the end, and I haven't covered so much, but that's fine, because all I want to give you with this slide is to show you all the other things that we're missing out on, all the other things that you could be eating if you embraced a historic past. So yeah, we've got the canapés, sprouts, the trifle, the leftovers. Those are all part of the modern day lexicon. But I mean, winter salads, amazing pies, boar's heads, cocentreases, jellies made with the same ingredients as Christmas puddings, brawn, straw potatoes, we know them as chips. Oh my goodness, and tipsy cake, just the best. This is the full menu from that little snapshot that I gave you earlier with the turkey on. I mean, just look at that. 2 courses of food. There would have been dessert as well of fruit and nuts. And there's so much on there, from larded sweetbreads to rabbit to turbot to pheasants with their heads and legs on, meringue baskets. I mean, spinach and eggs, something literally for everyone. Now, I'm not saying that's entirely practical in the average modern day household, but you look at that, you think to yourself, yeah, right. And then you look at that and you think to yourself, really? I mean, why? Why would we do this to ourselves, voluntarily allowing ourselves to be brainwashed by the media into thinking that that is a good idea? Overcooked turkey, flaccid pigs in blankets, they're very modern, by the way, bisteau with a bit of port in, a fondant icing cake, a Dundee cake with soggy almonds on top, bad chutney, that's going to be bad. And that Christmas pudding, I mean, it took me a while to work out it was supposed to be a Christmas pudding because it looks like a haggis. It's just soggy cake in the trifle. The yellowness of those sprouts, you just know that's your digestive system shot for the next week. And don't even get me started on that terrible looking wine. If this is your Christmas dinner, I'm sorry, But at least I've given you some ideas. And don't worry, because you can always look back in the past and find inspiration. And if you really can't do that, I guess you could look to the future instead. Thank you very much, and happy Christmas.